What if the person you trusted most in the world became your worst nightmare in a single night? On July 15, a wedding celebration that had lasted 3 days came to an end in a small town near Varanasi. Guests departed with full bellies and happy hearts, believing they had witnessed the perfect union between two families. Within 6 hours, that same celebration would transform into one of the most disturbing crime scenes police had ever encountered. Have you ever wondered what secrets the person lying next to you might be hiding? Do you know someone who seems charming in public but shows controlling behavior behind closed doors? Has your community ever been rocked by a tragedy that nobody saw coming? Tonight, we're exploring a case that exposes the deadly intersection of toxic masculinity, cultural honor obsession, and the devastating consequences of keeping secrets in relationships. This isn't just another crime story, it's a mirror reflecting dangerous patterns that exist in communities worldwide. The groom was Raghav Tiwari, 28, a textile shop owner known for his infectious laugh and ambitious dreams. The bride was Meera Singh, 24, daughter of a respected school principal, described by everyone as gentle and intelligent. Their families had spent months planning what they called the wedding of the year. But here's what nobody knew: Raghav had been planning something else entirely for their wedding night. Something that would require pesticide, a farming sickle, and a level of rage that would shock forensic psychologists. The question isn't just what happened that night, it's how a celebration of love became an execution chamber, and why the warning signs were missed by everyone who cared about this young woman. Before we continue, if stories like this open your eyes to the hidden dangers in our society, hit that subscribe button. These cautionary tales need to reach as many people as possible, because awareness can save lives. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about trust, marriage, and the masks people wear. By the end of this story, you'll understand why Meera's parents still wake up screaming, why an entire town changed their approach to arranged marriages, and why psychologists study this case to identify the warning signs of explosive violence. The wedding decorations were still hanging when the police arrived. The smell of jasmine flowers mixed with something far more disturbing. And in that bedroom, decorated for romance and new beginnings, investigators found evidence of premeditation that would make your blood run cold. Are you ready to discover what really happened when the wedding guests went home? The morning of July 15 started like any fairy tale wedding in rural India. Marigold garlands hung from every doorway, the air thick with incense and the sound of traditional drums. Women in bright saris bustled around the courtyard, their bangles creating a musical rhythm as they prepared feast after feast. Raghav Tiwari stood at the center of it all, wearing a cream-colored sherwani with gold embroidery that caught the sunlight. His smile was so wide that his cheeks hurt, and guests later remembered thinking they'd never seen a groom more excited to marry. He posed for countless photos, his arm around cousins and childhood friends, everyone commenting on how fortunate he was to marry into the Singh family. Raghav has worked so hard for this moment, his mother told relatives. Meera is exactly the kind of girl who will bring honor to our family. The bride herself was a vision in red silk, her hands decorated with intricate henna patterns that had taken hours to complete. Meera's friends from college had traveled from 3 different cities to attend, and they spent the morning braiding jasmine into her hair and applying the traditional kajal to her eyes. She laughed softly at their jokes, though those closest to her noticed she seemed more nervous than most brides. The ceremony itself was flawless. 7 circles around the sacred fire, ancient vows spoken in Sanskrit, blessings from elders whose approval meant everything to both families. When Raghav tied the Mangal Sutra around Meera's neck, the sacred necklace symbolizing their eternal bond, even the men in the audience felt their eyes water. "They look perfect together," whispered Mrs. Sharma, the neighborhood matchmaker who took credit for introducing the families. "Same social standing, compatible horoscopes, and look how he looks at her." The way Raghav looked at Meera was indeed notable. His gaze never left her face during the ceremony, studying every expression, cataloging every reaction. Some interpreted this as devotion. Others, looking back, would recognize it as something far more dangerous. The celebration continued until nearly midnight. Tables overflowed with traditional sweets, children ran between the adults playing games, and the elderly shared stories of their own wedding days. The photographer captured hundreds of moments of pure joy. But in all those photographs, if you looked carefully, you might have noticed something troubling. Raghav's smile never quite reached his eyes, especially when he thought nobody was watching. To understand what happened next, you need to know who Raghav really was beneath that charming exterior. His friends would later tell police investigators about conversations that should have raised red flags years earlier. Raghav worked 12-hour days in his family's textile shop, determined to expand their business beyond their small town. But his ambition was fueled by deep insecurity about his place in society. Despite his hard work, he constantly compared himself to wealthier men in the community, men who drove cars instead of motorcycles, men whose wives wore diamond jewelry instead of gold. He was always talking about respect. His cousin Amit revealed during police questioning. Raghav would say things like, "A man's honor depends on his wife's behavior," or "Women these days have too much freedom." We thought it was just traditional thinking. But there were darker moments. Friends remembered how Raghav reacted when his sister decided to work after marriage. He didn't speak to her for months, calling her choice shameful and modern nonsense. When a neighbor's daughter was seen talking to boys at college, Raghav made disgusted comments about loose character and family disgrace. Most troubling were his views on women's pasts. During late-night conversations, Raghav would rant about how women hide things and pretend innocence. He once told a friend, "A pure woman has nothing to hide. If she has secrets, she's already betrayed you." Meanwhile, Meera carried her own burden. During her second year at women's college in Allahabad, she had formed a friendship with a male classmate that gradually became romantic. It was innocent by most standards, holding hands, sharing books, dreaming about the future together. But when her parents discovered the relationship through college gossip, they were horrified. Ended immediately, her father had demanded. "Do you want to destroy our family's reputation?" Meera complied, breaking the young man's heart and her own. Her parents never spoke of it again, believing the matter was buried forever. They carefully arranged her marriage to Raghav, ensuring the families had no mutual connections to her college city. But secrets have a way of surfacing at the worst possible moments. During the wedding festivities, Raghav's uncle Vinod had consumed more alcohol than usual. While smoking with other men outside the celebration hall, he struck up a conversation with a distant relative of Meera's family, a man who had attended the same college in Allahabad. "Beautiful bride," the relative commented. "Though she had quite the reputation at college, if I remember correctly. Always with that boy, what was his name? Rohit?" They were inseparable for months. The words hit Vinod like cold water. When he sobered up the next morning, he realized with horror what he'd heard. But the damage was already spreading. Another uncle overheard, then whispered to his wife, who mentioned it to Raghav's mother, who finally, reluctantly, told her son. Have you ever noticed how the most dangerous people often seem the most charming? Share this video if you've learned to recognize the warning signs of possessive behavior. By the time the wedding ceremony began, Raghav's mind was consumed with rage, betrayal, and plans for revenge. As the last guests departed around 11 p.m., laughing and calling out final blessings, the Tiwari household settled into post-wedding exhaustion. The women began the massive task of cleaning up, while the men sat in the courtyard sharing one final drink and replaying the day's highlights. According to traditional custom, the newlyweds were given privacy in the specially prepared bridal chamber on the second floor. The room had been transformed into a romantic sanctuary, rose petals scattered across pristine white bedsheets, candles flickering in brass holders, and a silver tray arranged with traditional sweets that the couple would share to symbolize the sweetness of their new life together. Among those sweets were laddus, Meera's favorite, round balls of gram flour, ghee, and sugar, dusted with cardamom and shaped by the loving hands of Raghav's grandmother. They sat in a delicate ceramic bowl, looking innocent and inviting. But those ladus harbored a deadly secret. 3 weeks earlier, Rugov had visited an agricultural supply store on the outskirts of town. He told the shopkeeper he needed rat poison to protect grain storage in his family's warehouse. The shopkeeper, knowing the Tiwari family for years, handed over a container of aluminum phosphide powder, a common pesticide that becomes lethal when consumed. Just a pinch mixed with food, the shopkeeper had casually advised. The rats never know what hit them. Rugov had waited for the perfect moment. Earlier that evening, while his family was distracted with guest farewells, he slipped into the kitchen and carefully mixed the white powder into the laddu mixture his grandmother had prepared. His hands remained steady throughout the process. This was not a crime of passion, but calculated premeditation. When Mira finally entered the bridal chamber, removing her heavy gold jewelry and letting down her elaborately styled hair, she expected shy conversation, perhaps some gentle teasing about married life. Instead, she found her new husband sitting rigidly on the bed's edge, his expression cold and unrecognizable. "Sit down," he commanded, his voice carrying none of the warmth she'd heard during their courtship meetings. Confused, Mira sat beside him, still wearing her red silk sari but feeling suddenly vulnerable. The room that had seemed romantic moments earlier now felt suffocating. "I know about the boy," Rugov said quietly. The words hit Mira like physical blows. Her mouth went dry, her hands began trembling. How could he possibly know about something that had ended 3 years ago? Something her parents had sworn would never be mentioned again? "What boy?" she whispered, though her voice betrayed her. Rugov's expression twisted with disgust. "Don't lie to me. Not on our wedding night. I know about your relationship at college. I know about Rohit." Hearing that name spoken aloud after years of silence broke something inside Mira. She began crying, not the gentle tears of a nervous bride, but the desperate sobs of someone whose deepest shame had been exposed. "It wasn't. It didn't mean, we barely even." She stammered between sobs. But Rugov wasn't interested in explanations. In his mind, her tears confirmed everything. The woman he'd married, the woman who was supposed to bring honor to his family, was damaged goods, who had deceived him. "Eat," he said, pushing the tray of sweets toward her. "Show me you can be an obedient wife." Still crying, trying desperately to explain that her past relationship had been innocent, Mira reached for a laddu. Anything to calm his anger, anything to convince him that she could be the wife he wanted. She took a bite, then another, the cardamom familiar and comforting despite her emotional turmoil. Within 10 minutes, she was writhing on the floor, foam emerging from her mouth, her eyes rolling back as the poison attacked her nervous system. And that's when Rugov's plan took an even darker turn. Watching Mira convulse on the bedroom floor, Rugov felt no remorse, only a rage that seemed to expand with every labored breath she took. In his twisted logic, the poison was justice for her betrayal, but as she lay dying, he decided it wasn't enough. Forensic psychologists who later studied this case identified this moment as a complete psychological break. Dr. Reena Malhotra, who interviewed Rugov during his trial, explained, the subject displayed classic signs of narcissistic rage combined with cultural honor obsession. When his perceived masculinity was threatened, rational thought ceased entirely. Mira was barely conscious when Rugov made his decision. Death by poison seemed too quiet for what he considered her crime. In his deteriorating mental state, he believed her past relationship was a deliberate humiliation that required public punishment, even if that public was only him. He left her gasping on the bedroom floor and walked downstairs to the storage room where farming tools were kept. His grandfather's sickle hung on a wooden peg, its curved blade sharp from years of careful maintenance. Rugov's hands were surprisingly steady as he lifted it, testing its weight. When he returned to the bedroom, Mira had stopped moving. The poison had completed its work, but Rugov's fury demanded more. What happened next defies comprehension for most people, but represents a terrifying reality. When toxic masculinity combines with explosive rage, violence knows no bounds. The attack was swift and brutal. Neighbors later testified they heard no screams. The poison had silenced Mira before the real violence began. But what Raghav did to her body after death revealed the depth of his psychological collapse. He desecrated the very space that was supposed to symbolize their sacred union. Rose petals became stained with blood, candlelight flickered over scenes of unthinkable violence, and the traditional sweets lay scattered across the floor, mixed with evidence of his complete mental breakdown. Crime scene investigators who processed the room would later require counseling. The contrast between the romantic decorations and the horrific violence created an atmosphere that haunted everyone who witnessed it. The wedding photographer's backdrop of flowers and silk served as the setting for what one officer described as the most disturbing domestic violence case in our district's history. But perhaps most chilling was what Raghav did next. After completing his gruesome work, he sat on the blood-stained bed for nearly an hour, apparently talking to Mira's body. Neighbors reported hearing muffled conversation from the room, though they assumed it was normal wedding night intimacy. Finally, around 3 a.m., Raghav opened the bedroom window and climbed down the exterior wall, leaving through the courtyard where wedding decorations still hung like mockeries of celebration. He walked through the empty streets carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and guilt that would follow him forever. Behind him, he left a crime scene that would traumatize everyone who discovered it, destroy 2 families, and force an entire community to confront the toxic attitudes that had been hiding in plain sight. The sun was rising as he walked toward the river, his mind already fractured beyond repair. Dawn brought the traditional sounds of a post-wedding morning. Birds chirped in the courtyard where marigold petals still carpeted the ground, and the smell of brewing tea mixed with lingering incense from the previous night's ceremonies. Raghav's mother, Kamala, woke early to prepare breakfast for the newlyweds, a special meal that would mark their first morning as a married couple. The family moved quietly, respecting the privacy of the bridal chamber. Cultural tradition dictated that the new bride would emerge around 8 a.m. to touch the feet of her new elders and receive their blessings. Kamala had prepared a silk sari for Mira to wear, along with traditional jewelry that would mark her transition from daughter to daughter-in-law. But 8 a.m. came and went with no sign of either Raghav or Mira. By 9 a.m., concern began replacing respect for privacy. Kamala knocked softly on the bedroom door, calling out gentle inquiries about breakfast. When she received no response, she knocked louder, worry creeping into her voice. "Mira, beta? Raghav? Are you well?" Still nothing. Raghav's younger sister Priya, who had helped decorate the bridal chamber the night before, suggested maybe the couple had left early for a temple visit. But Raghav's motorcycle remained in the courtyard, and his father found the front door locked from inside. By 10 a.m., genuine alarm had replaced polite concern. The family gathered outside the bedroom door, calling both names and receiving only silence in response. Kamala's maternal instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong. "Break it down," Raghav's father finally ordered. Priya was the first through the door. Her scream shattered the morning quiet and brought neighbors running from 3 houses away. She collapsed immediately, her mind unable to process what lay before her. The bedroom that had been prepared with such loving care had become a slaughterhouse. Kamala reached the doorway seconds later and fainted instantly. Raghav's father managed one glance before rushing outside to vomit in the courtyard. The uncle who had carried tales about Mira's past relationship began sobbing uncontrollably, understanding immediately that his loose tongue had contributed to this nightmare. Within minutes, the police were called, the scene was sealed, and news of the horrific discovery began spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire. Religious leaders were summoned to perform purification rituals, women wailed in the streets, and men stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how their community celebration had transformed into their worst nightmare. The wedding decorations still hanging in the courtyard seemed to mock the horror above, creating a surreal contrast that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. The police manhunt for Raghav lasted less than 12 hours. He was found sitting beside the Ganges River, approximately 4 kilometers from his family home, staring at the flowing water with vacant eyes. Local fishermen reported seeing him there since before dawn, muttering to himself and occasionally laughing inappropriately. When officers approached, Raghav offered no resistance. His clothes were stained with blood, his hands bore cuts from the sickle, and his hair was disheveled from hours of pulling at it. But most disturbing was his demeanor. He seemed almost relieved to see the police. "I did what honor demanded," he told the arresting officers matter-of-factly. "She deceived me. She brought shame to my family." During interrogation, Raghav showed no remorse for his actions. He methodically described purchasing the poison, planning the confrontation, and carrying out what he called justified punishment. Police psychologists noted his complete inability to recognize Meera as a human being who had deserved life and dignity. The trial became a media sensation across northern India. Meera's father, the respected school principal, delivered victim impact statements that reduced hardened court reporters to tears. He spoke about his daughter's kindness, her dreams of becoming a teacher, and how she had died in terror on what should have been the happiest night of her life. "She told me one secret from her youth," he sobbed in court. "One innocent relationship that ended years ago. For that, this monster destroyed her." The prosecution emphasized the premeditation involved, the purchased poison, the prepared weapon, the calculated timing. Defense attorneys attempted to argue temporary insanity, but the evidence of planning destroyed their case. Raghav was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. As the verdict was read, he showed no emotion beyond mild annoyance at the proceedings. His family faced complete social ostracism. Their textile business collapsed within weeks as customers refused to shop there. Neighbors stopped speaking to them, and they eventually sold their ancestral home and moved to a distant city where nobody knew their story. Prison officials reported that Raghav frequently woke screaming, claiming Meera's spirit was demanding justice. Whether guilt or psychological deterioration, his nights became filled with terror that would never end. This tragic case exposes dangerous patterns that exist in communities worldwide, patterns we must recognize and address before they claim more lives. First, the toxic obsession with female purity creates environments where women live in fear of their own histories. Meera's innocent college relationship became a death sentence because cultural attitudes treat women's past experiences as permanent stains on family honor. This mindset turns marriage into ownership rather than partnership. Second, possessive behavior often masquerades as traditional values or protective love. Raghav's friends described his controlling attitudes as old-fashioned thinking, missing crucial warning signs. When someone expresses extreme views about women's behavior or talks about honor requiring punishment, those aren't cultural values, they're red flags indicating potential violence. Third, the silence surrounding women's experiences creates deadly secrets. Meera's parents believed burying her past would protect her, but their silence left her vulnerable to Raghav's rage. Open communication about relationships and experiences, even uncomfortable ones, provides protection against those who weaponize shame. Most critically, this case demonstrates how easily accessible tools and substances become instruments of premeditated violence. Raghav purchased poison with a casual conversation and accessed weapons that were part of everyday life. This accessibility, combined with toxic mindsets, creates deadly combinations. The psychological profile of perpetrators like Raghav reveals common patterns: extreme insecurity masked as masculine pride, inability to view women as autonomous individuals, and explosive reactions to perceived threats to their reputation. These men don't snap suddenly, they reveal who they've always been when circumstances align. Communities that truly want to prevent such tragedies must examine their attitudes toward women, relationships, and honor. They must teach young men that masculinity isn't threatened by women's independence or past experiences. Most importantly, they must create environments where women can speak honestly about their lives without fear of violence. If this story has opened your eyes to these crucial issues, like this video and subscribe for more content that exposes dangerous patterns hiding in plain sight. Awareness can save lives. Meera Singh deserved to live, to teach, to love, and to make her own choices. Her death demands that we do better.